Mr. Kelly, for your presentation. Next to speak against the bill is Mr. James Taylor. State your name, please.
I'm James Taylor. I'm Senior Fellow for Environment Policy with the Heartland Institute. We are a public policy organization. We believe in free markets, and we represent consumers, and we focus on state-specific issues. Chairman Granson and Chairman Chesterfield, members of the committee, thank you so much for having me here today. It truly is an honor and a privilege to be invited here. My family's from Arkansas. For generations, we had a family farm up in Osceola, and it may seem like a long time ago to many of us, but to me it seems like just yesterday, growing up in the 1970s, where the day after Thanksgiving every year, we couldn't put up the Christmas tree, we couldn't go Christmas shopping until we turned on the TV and watched Arkansas whoop Texas A&M under the Olson's option offense. So it truly is a pleasure to be back, a fond memories indeed. Now, regarding this bill and other issues in front of the legislature, I think one thing we can agree on is that we all want a prosperous and economically successful Arkansas. Where we differ sometimes is where we think the best path to that goal is. And in that regard, it's very good. It's a good idea to come together to discuss ideas, to flesh out what the best opportunities are, and to have an open and honest discussion and debate on these issues. But I think we all agree that we want a prosperous Arkansas. And I think we can also agree that energy costs are one of the most important factors that are either going to encourage or stifle economic activity in the state and throughout the nation. When energy prices rise, it's very much like a tax in the sense that, one, when we open up our power bills, we pay more out of our pockets in order to pay for our electricity. But not just what we get in the mail in terms of our electric bill. When we purchase goods and services, businesses, industries, they have to pay for electricity. They pass the cost down. So when electricity prices rise, it's like having a new tax. But it's even worse than a tax because when we are taxed by government for services and goods, we have a reasonable expectation that we will see a return on that investment. Our taxes indeed deliver goods and services. But when we pay higher electric bills, we're getting the same electricity. We're just losing money in the process. Now, that being the case and understanding the importance of electricity prices, it's important to understand that renewable power in the past, in the present, and for as far into the future as we can see, is prohibitively more expensive than conventional energy. And we can see this in the results of various studies and forecasts by economists and the federal government. MIT, for example, published a study, and what they did is they stripped away the subsidies, the preferential tax treatments, and they looked at the levelized cost of electricity production. And what they found is that wind power, for example, is 75% more expensive than conventional energy. 75% is a large number. Now, solar power was even more expensive. Solar power was anywhere from 500 to 900% of the cost of conventional energy. Every time that we have an incremental increase in these renewable energy sources, the people that are opening up their power bills, that are paying for goods and services on the market, are paying that cost. Now, it would be wonderful to think that perhaps we could pass legislation to make renewable power, to make solar power and wind power more cost-effective to produce, but we know we can't. So what we have to do is look at what's going on in the real world, what's likely to happen regarding these energy markets. And we can certainly cheer on wind power, solar power, or any other form of electricity. We should cheer them all on. But we have to remember what the costs are. Now, I presented the MIT study for the costs that exist currently. But the federal government also projects these costs out into the future, in fact, for many decades to come. So the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they project the cost of electricity out for power plants that are being built in 2016, 2017, and over the life of those power plants, of those electricity generating facilities. So what they're looking at is several decades out into the future. And what they find is that we still have the same cost increase, the levelized cost increase, even when we take away all the subsidies and the preferences. When we look at what it costs ultimately to produce this electricity, according to EIA, the Energy Information Administration, for decades to come, wind power is still going to be at least 50% more expensive than conventional power. Every time we add an increment of wind power to our electric bills, we're paying that cost 50% higher than our electricity prices. Solar power, although they say that solar power may be substantial price increase that we're currently experiencing, 500 to 900%, that's going to come down, but it's still going to be 200 to 300% the price of conventional energy. We are still going to be paying through the roof for these electricity sources that are favored in this bill. So it's important to understand that one other factor when EIA is looking at these prices, I mentioned wind power being 50% more expensive than conventional power for decades to come. EIA is assuming a 34% capacity factor for wind power. In the real world, capacity factor for wind power is about 23%. It's not going to substantially increase anytime soon. It's a very pie-in-the-sky rosy scenario. Even with that rosy scenario, we're looking at 50% higher prices, according to the federal government itself. If we look at more realistic capacity factors for wind power, now we're looking at a price being more than double what the price would be for conventional electricity generation. Now, one of the factors for this ongoing differential in price is the fact that we have had recently a natural gas revolution. Technological advances in drilling and also new discoveries have brought natural gas prices down incredibly low, and they're going to remain that way for decades and probably centuries to come. And that's according, again, to EIA forecasts. And in fact, here in Arkansas, we have the Fayetteville Shale Formation, where we're blessed with abundant natural gas resources. In North Dakota, they're taking advantage of this. Now, their shale formations, they have natural gas and oil. By producing these energy resources, their unemployment rate is 3.0%. Throughout the recession, their unemployment rate has been about 3%. Those are the benefits of encouraging affordable, efficient energy production. And when I say encouraging, not subsidizing, not giving them a guaranteed market share, but merely taking the shackles off and saying, you can compete. You can compete for the whole pie. And whatever you're able to produce at a reasonable price, you're probably going to find a market for it. And it benefits the entire economy. 3.0% unemployment is quite impressive. Another point I'd like to make is that certainly environmental concerns are important. And to the extent that it was mentioned earlier that we have these environmental benefits for wind power, the benefit of wind and solar power environmentally is that you reduce emissions of particulates of pollutants into the air. Now, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, they've documented that just in the past 3 decades, our overall emissions have declined by more than 70%. There is progress. There's a great deal of progress regarding our conventional energy sources and the emissions we have. But just as importantly, I mentioned the natural gas revolution that is benefiting Arkansas economically. It also will benefit Arkansas environmentally. Natural gas, regarding the 6 principal pollutants tracked by EPA, natural gas cuts those pollutants by 90+%. It's essentially an emissions-free power source. At the same time, wind power, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, kills 440,000 birds each and every year. That includes endangered species, protected species, bald eagles, California condors. It's indiscriminate. That's something that is unique to wind power. And that's why wind power is only generating about 2% of our nation's electricity. If we ramp it up here in Arkansas and elsewhere, we're going to see millions of birds killed each year by wind turbines. A similar number of bats are killed by wind turbines. And also, according to the American Wind Energy Association's own numbers, to replace the same amount of power from a conventional power plant, you need anywhere from 300 to 600 square miles of wind turbines. That's quite a bit of development. And the places where they say it's most economical to produce wind is in the mountain ridges, is in the places where we have the vistas that we try in northwestern Arkansas, the mountaintop ridges that tourists come from all over the nation to go to and visit. That's where they want to put the wind towers. That's where the turbines make the most amount of sense, little sense overall, but comparatively speaking. Now, I mentioned the costs that MIT and the federal government have documented for wind power and solar power, renewable power. These have real-world impacts, and we can see them in the individual states. In 2007, Colorado generated 2.5% of their electricity from renewable sources, much like Arkansas does today. Now, they put into place a renewable power mandate. So today, 5 years later, Colorado is generating 11% of their power from renewable sources. Now, what has that meant economically to the citizens of Colorado? Well, since 2007, nationally, electricity prices have risen 8%, and they've done the same here in Arkansas. In Colorado, electricity prices have risen by more than 20%. That's more than twice the national average, more than twice the average here in Arkansas. That shows up in retail bills that consumers pay. That shows up in the cost of goods and services in the state. That's a real-world impact. When we look at those costs, we can break that down. If we look at the overall economy, compare Colorado to Wyoming. If Colorado right now paid the same amount for their electricity as citizens do in Wyoming, Coloradans would save $1 billion every year. On a per household basis, that's $600 each and every year that each family in Colorado is paying more than citizens across the border in Wyoming. That's the price of expensive power. It's also important to keep in mind that when we look at solar and wind power, a lot depends on where you are. Natural gas power plants, coal power plants, wherever you put them, the price is going to be roughly the same. But wind and solar power vary greatly depending upon what the resources are. Now, according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, Arkansas is poorly situated for wind power production. It's below average. When I cited the prices in the real world today and for the foreseeable future, that's assuming, that's looking into account today at places where wind power is produced, where it's most conducive to wind power production. That's not the case here in Arkansas. Solar power, Arkansas is about average. But again, those numbers I cited are numbers for where it's most conducive for solar power production. So here in Arkansas, the costs are going to go up even more than the numbers I mentioned. Some folks have mentioned the jobs that have been created or would be created as a result of wind power production, solar power production. But keep in mind that if you separate a certain market share and say this has to be for wind power or solar power, of course you're getting jobs in that sector. You've mandated it. At the same time, you've prevented folks in the conventional industries from creating jobs there. You haven't created any jobs, you've merely shifted them around. But more importantly, you've also killed jobs throughout the economy. Because when people have to pay more money for electricity, they're taking money out of food, out of housing, out of clothing, out of durable consumer goods. That's money that is no longer being spent elsewhere in the economy. You're killing jobs elsewhere. So the assertion that we're creating jobs in the renewable energy industry is illusory. So for every job that's claimed to be created, keep in mind you're killing elsewhere in the economy. Economists in Spain have documented at King Juan Carlos University that for every job that was created there in the renewable energy industry by these types of programs, 2.2 jobs were killed elsewhere. Versal Economics concluded in the UK that 3.7 jobs were killed in the UK for every single job that was created in the renewable energy industry. One point I'd just like to emphasize here, that if you only take one thing away from my presentation, I hope you'll remember this. When I presented these numbers about the costs that are borne by consumers in the UK, in Spain, in Colorado, wherever renewable power is mandated, 2 weeks ago, I was invited to testify in Ohio, where the Senate Public Utilities Committee was considering a bill to repeal their renewable power. They've seen the cost of it, and they found that it's not good for Ohio consumers. As I was testifying, as a gentleman from the Solar Energy Industries Association was testifying, I presented these numbers. And here we have the renewable power lobbyist who said, well, Mr. Taylor is correct in the sense that renewable power is more expensive than conventional power. But the numbers that he's presented, especially the ones regarding Spain and the UK, the reason why they've had so many negative economic consequences there is because they have feed-in tariffs. The feed-in tariffs are the most expensive kind. And here in Ohio, this bill does not have anything to do with feed-in tariffs. Well, you'll notice that here in Arkansas, this bill specifically is targeted with feed-in tariffs. That's the whole point. And after this gentleman, the renewable power industry lobbyist, made this point, I didn't ask him about it. He volunteered it. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear you say it because it's true, but when I've testified in other states, when I've been in community forums in other parts of the country, I always hear people, the renewable power folks, advocating feed-in tariffs. And he said, well, we've learned from our mistakes. We don't do that anymore. Those were his exact words. We have learned from our mistakes. And so I understand that here the feed-in tariff, the folks that are proposing it, they have a good heart, their intentions are good, but even the renewable power industry says it's not a good idea. And certainly if you don't want to take my word for it, Chairman Seitz from the Ohio Senate Public Utilities Committee 2 weeks ago, I'm sure that he will have a very strong recollection of those comments, because that was a focal point. If we are proposing a feed-in tariff, if we're mandating it, this is what other states, this is what the renewable folks in other states say precisely is the problem elsewhere in the world and elsewhere in the country. And so even though I think renewable power doesn't make sense economically regardless, especially the feed-in tariff in Arkansas, I hope you'll take pause to consider that. Find more information, talk to the folks in other states where even the renewable power folks have said it doesn't make sense. So with that, I'd just like to thank you once again.